another Jewish Forum program. I have a very interesting guest. His name is Haym Fleischman, and Wayne is a commercial property manager, plus he has a special interest in American Jewish history, and especially the origins of the Jews' contribution in making this a great country. And he's going to tell you more. First, welcome.
Well,
welcome, Wayne.
Thank you. Thank you, Barry, for having me on your show.
I'm glad you're here tonight. And Wayne's topic, my friends, is America's origins are rooted in the influence of the Bible. So we go back to biblical days. With that, Wayne, do you want to quickly tell our viewing audience a little about your background, your family, your education, and any special interests?
Sure. Well, I graduated from Quinnipiac University. I was born in Milford, Connecticut, raised in Fairfield. I'm married. My wife has been on your show, married.
Yes, she has.
And not to mention my in-laws.
I've had the whole family on your show.
I think everyone but my kids.
You're right.
And I have 4 of them, Micah, Davi,
well,
Shoshana.
In the future, maybe we'll get them on.
Yes, definitely. And my interest has always been history, Jewish history, American history, and world history.
Okay. Now, what got you interested in the unique history of the Jews in early American history? And as our topic said, that these interests are rooted in the Bible.
Right. Well, what got me interested is if you look at world history, in particular, European history, if you look at the nations of Europe where they were Christian majority,
right,
and you go from the time that the Roman Empire converted to Christianity to the Middle Ages, it's one of where there was persecution and religious intolerance. But then, when you get to the history of America, again, this is a Christian majority country, but then it was a nation where you had religious freedom, tolerance, separation of church and state. So I wanted to know the why. Why?
That's a good point.
Yes.
I mean, like you said, Europe is made up of Christian nations. We were a Christian nation, and yet the Jews were treated differently in both places.
Right, and in my research, there's 2 theories that come up. One is that the American founding fathers were atheists, agnostics, deists, just secular. They weren't interested in the Bible or Christianity, and therefore didn't have the anti-Semitism that Christians for centuries would get from the Christian scriptures, the incitement that led to the hatred of Jews. Another theory is that actually they were religious. They considered themselves Bible-believing Christians,
right,
and it wasn't in spite of this belief, but actually because of this, maybe the emphasis being heavier on what they call the Old Testament, our Hebrew Bible, but nevertheless, it was because of that it led to the better treatment and the unique experience that the Jewish people have had in America.
Okay, interesting theories. And well, let's go on a little bit further. Like you said, our founding fathers were religious. Some were religious Christians. Some believed in a secular America, and so on. And yet, they allowed the Jews to come here, and the Jews didn't face persecution.
No, and the thing is that I've found that the founding fathers are religious. It's a relative term to view some as the least religious. They really believed in the Bible. Just to, if I may, just to quote from
sure, go ahead.
the founding. These are letters that are from some of the founding fathers. One is from John Adams, of course.
Who was our second president.
And this was a letter about the Jews' contribution to civilization.
Oh, share it with our viewing audience.
Sure. In it he writes, I will insist the Hebrews have contributed more to civilized men than any other nation. If I was an atheist, notice he said if I was, but he's not, and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe that fate had ordained the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nation, the most glorious nation that ever inhabited this earth. They have given to 3/4 of the globe religion, and they've influenced the affairs of mankind more and more happily than any other nation, both ancient or modern. Now that is a very
profound,
very profound, very positive. I mean, you're seeing here is someone who's considering himself a Christian,
right?
And he is philo-Semitic. Philo from the Greek word meaning love, a love of Jews, not anti-Semitic, as was the case in Christian Europe.
Now did he have Jewish friends? Were we able to find any
From my
connection?
research, he didn't really seem to know that many Jews.
Okay.
But he certainly had a very positive view of the Jews, as this letter reflects.
And I believe you have another letter.
Yes. This is a letter from George Washington, of course, our first president, father of our country. This is a letter that he wrote in May of 1789. He wrote letters to synagogues. Now, probably the most famous of the letters that he wrote to synagogues was the Toro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island.
Exactly.
And but this is a different letter. This was a letter that he wrote to a synagogue in Savannah, Georgia, and he writes the following. He writes, "May the same wonder-working deity who long since delivered the Hebrews from their Egyptian oppressors, planted them in a promised land, whose providential agency has lately been conspicuous in establishing these United States as an independent nation, still continue to water them with the dews of heaven, and make the inhabitants of every denomination participate in the temporal and spiritual blessings of the people whose God is Jehovah." So what George Washington is saying here is, may we receive the blessings from your God, the God who chose you. I see, and may this blessing be given to the denominations. He means the Christian denominations. This, I see, is clearly being reflected from his reading of Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, in which God tells Abraham, I will bless those who bless the Jews, and I will curse, or I will take down those who curse the Jews. And George Washington is clearly influenced in this letter. What he's saying is, we are going to treat you Jews well. We want to get the blessing from that God of the Bible, and we want the blessing to be shared among all the Christian denominations here in America.
What an interesting statement.
Fascinating, yes.
It is fascinating. And yet, I don't know, was George Washington a religious man?
He was. There's a famous painting of him praying. He constantly brings up the God in the Bible. He definitely believed in a supernatural God. It comes up in many of his writings.
Yeah. Do you want to just briefly, just talk about, very briefly, I know we have lots of things to cover, the famous letter to the Toro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island.
Right.
In fact, there's a U.S. stamp that has part of that quote.
Right.
With a picture of the synagogue on it.
Right. I mean, I think the most famous line is to give bigotry no sanction.
And persecution no assistance.
Right.
And then he went on and on about the Jews should live in peace under their fig trees and enjoy being citizens of our great country, etc.
Right, and that image of the fig trees, that's coming from the prophets, that's coming from the Bible. So clearly he's being influenced by the Bible.
I was born in Newport. I don't know if you knew this
or not. I did not know that, though.
My parents were married in the Turo Synagogue, and they have a pew set aside with George Washington's letter edged in stone over the pew where George Washington sat when he visited Newport. The legislature met there, and bridal couples were able to sit where George Washington sat. My parents sat there.
Fantastic.
It is, and every year they have a special program. But you're right. I'm glad you shared the other letter, because most people just know the Turo Synagogue letter,
Right.
but not the other one. Let's go on. Who were some of the prominent Jews during the founding of the United States?
Well, you have, there was Mordecai Sheftel.
Who was Mordecai Sheftel?
Mordecai Sheftel was the commander of the Patriot forces in Georgia during the American Revolutionary War. Now, we have to pause and think about that, because what that means is here you have a Jew being the commander of an army of Christians. I don't know any time in history before America where that was even remotely possible.
Absolutely.
Right. So that really, I just found, again, the uniqueness about America and the relationship between Christian and Jews. You also had Colonel Isaac Franks and his brother, Colonel David Franks. They were both colonels under General George Washington. They were Jewish leaders and synagogue leaders. And then there's also Francis Salvador. Francis Salvador was the first Jew to be killed in the American Revolutionary War.
Interesting.
Yes, but the one who probably is the most well-known, at least he gets mentioned in American school textbooks. I know he was mentioned in my middle school textbook, was Haym Solomon.
Haym Solomon, absolutely.
Yeah, Haym Solomon is known as the financier of the American Revolution, and he came from Poland, and he came to America in 1772. George Washington actually said that Haym Solomon, who came to America, he became a successful merchant. George Washington said if it wasn't for him, there would have been no American Revolution. He gave his fortune, donated his fortune to the American Revolution, and what George Washington said was actually correct, because when the Americans were fighting the British, no country wanted to help the Americans. They felt England is the most powerful nation in the world. There's no way the Americans are going to win. So he kept it going until the Americans had some successful won battles, until eventually the Dutch and the French gave the desperately needed funds. Along with Haym Solomon, there was a founding father, Robert Moore.
Well, before you go on further, I believe, if I read my history correctly, that when he died penniless.
Yes, he really did. He
gave all his money away.
Gave all his money to help the cause of American independence. And the founding father, Robert Morris, who was a Christian, he did the same thing, also went penniless. He's a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And the reason I bring him up as well is because if you go to Chicago, if you go to the business financial district in Chicago, there is a statue of George Washington, and on one side is Haym Solomon, and on the other side is Robert Morris, and they're holding hands. And here you have the hand of a Jew holding the hand of a Christian, and it is very well possible that if it wasn't for them, we might still be British subjects today.
Interesting.
Yes.
I'm so glad you shared that.
Yes, it really just, again...
It blows your mind.
It blows your mind. You can honestly say we have a Jewish founding father.
I think that's just great. Who were some of the others?
Well, again, I mentioned there were many colonels who were Jewish. And
well, you know, that in itself is significant, that the Jews did fight in the Revolution on the American side.
Right.
And they were very prominent.
Right.
And they really contributed a great deal.
Yes.
When you think about that.
Yes, and...
they were a small minority.
They were a small minority, but they had a big impact.
Yes.
You know, the other thing about Haym Solomon is that he also rescued. He negotiated the release of many prisoner of wars, and also was able to persuade the mercenary, the Hessians, the German mercenaries who the British used, to give up their commission to stop fighting for the British. So I
never knew that.
Yes, and the fascinating thing about him is he, as you said, he was penniless, and his family descendants later on tried to get the money from the bosses, and they were not successful in that.
Yeah.